And any minute now, we should be live. Here we go. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Gun Gamers podcast. It's been a while since we've done one of these, huh?
We've been pretty busy going to games and enjoying ourselves.
And destroying people.
We're too busy actually playing the game to, spend too much time making podcasts and whatnot. We're super behind on uploads. I don't think we've uploaded a video in like 2 weeks, which is,
I know I'm filming a couple of things.
It'll be fine. I'm filming a couple of things this week.
We just filmed a bunch of stuff this weekend, so we'll have videos coming back out on a pretty normal schedule. But I mean, even our schedule for the next couple months is going to be pretty crazy. But we're trying. We're trying to get back onto our schedule because we know people miss our content. Probably not, but 3 or 4 people probably do.
Mostly us. We watch our own content.
We do. All of the thumbs ups you see on all of our videos are just us.
I think my dad has watched our content more than I have. He's subscribed to an old a car channel and a plane channel and us because he doesn't know how to YouTube. So it just pops up. So it's oh, all right.
The fact he subscribed to us clearly shows us how to YouTube. I'm kidding. We love everyone who watches this. But let's get into the meat of the show. Okay. So today, with this podcast idea actually came about 10 hours ago, maybe.
Not even. Yeah. It was right around lunchtime. I think
it was. So it was probably 8 hours ago. And we were talking about airsoft games and scenario design and scenario ideas. And Joe brought up the idea of doing this as a podcast, but the discussion kind of centered around, well, how much does story matter for an airsoft game design versus how much does the scenario and the objective and the gameplay design matter? Continue.
You have to remember, and this is a great introduction as well, what Eric's saying, we're LARPing, folks. Whether you want to admit it or not, this is a very elaborate live-action roleplay in one capacity or another. Whether it's just messing around in your backyard and being all right, we're going to have fun, and you just have, reds versus blues, or if you're doing, hey, we're doing a 40-hour Milsim game, and there's a whole, 6 pages of background that's an ongoing game of 3 years and running, it is a LARP at the end of the day. So it does have a structure of a story behind it, theoretically.
But even the degree of LARP changes with, the degree of story and how much that matters. Because you're not exactly going to say that a Speed QB tournament is LARP. That's a completely different type of thing.
No, I think there's a balancing act between airsoft as a game, the idea that there are sides competing for an objective, but then there's also kind of a backstory and a lore associated with why those two teams are going with, and that's where you see more of the Milsim aspect of it.
Okay, I think that's an important distinction. What we're going to be talking about mostly is ops and Milsim scenario design, because I think we can agree right off the bat immediately, no one's going to your average open play or a Speed QB tournament or Attack City, Buffalo Battleground, River City type of field for an average day airsoft. No one's going to one of those expecting an involved story or any kind of framework other than capture the flag, bomb defusal, maybe, something like that.
That's fair.
Yeah. At that point, it's very much like going into any other multiplayer shooter game.
It's exactly like that.
You're dropped in, and it's less of, okay, you're on the code of paint of what the single player was, and more of, okay, this is the stuff that I have.
Yeah, so that's very much just the raw game aspect. That's your average match of Call of Duty. You're not caring about that other kind of stuff. But once you get into scenario game design, and when you get into Milsim, and even Milsim Light and even local ops, that's when things kind of start changing. So I actually put a poll up in the Gun Gamers discussion group that I'm going to pull up on my phone right now. And I put this up today knowing we were doing this podcast, and I thought the results were pretty interesting. So I put this poll up and it says, how important is a story or narrative scenario to you for Airsoft games? And the most voted on option by far, the most picked option, I only let people pick one, was 41 votes. This was in the Gun Gamers discussion group, though, so bear in mind our sample size. I like having a scenario to frame the gameplay, but I'm more worried about having fun objectives.
So that's a that should tell you in a nutshell really what this comes down to. When we're out there playing Airsoft, regardless if we're out there doing Milsim Light or Milsim or like what we do at Ground Zero Airsoft in Connecticut, and that's this is a comment I said to Eric, which kind of sparked this whole podcast and this whole discussion, which is I tend to get bored if I'm at an Airsoft game, even if there's a lot of people and I have a million objectives to do, if I don't have at least some frame, a reference of mind of why I'm doing something. And in smaller games, you know, why you're doing something is I feel like shooting things that day, so I'm just in a little skirmish, and that's fun. But when you start to get up to the bigger things, well, why am I dragging around this 55-pound weight dummy? Why am I dredging out into a swamp to recover a barrel with something in it? Why am I guarding this person? Why am I doing any of these things? If there's no reason to do this in the context of the game, you tend to see people then break down and go, well, I'm just going to go find something to do. Like shoot at each other, which is great. And the whole point of Airsoft really at the end of the day. But if you're there to do a few other things, it gives perspective and a little more body to what you're doing than just kind of meandering around looking for people to shoot at all day long, which is fun, but maybe not 8.5 hours fun.
Well, and that's the thing. I think storyline and scenario becomes more important once the games get longer. You don't need to have an investment in the outcome of rescuing a pilot for a 15-minute game. Like, you don't give a shit about that pilot. That pilot is probably just a flag. But once you're getting into rotations of an hour and a half, and you're holding your attention and other people's attention for that much longer, I think people want a little bit more depth. They want to feel a little bit more immersed. And I think that's ultimately the goal, is you have enough of a scenario to provide immersion, but that scenario's priority is to facilitate the objectives.
Yeah, I think the comment that I actually made on that particular post, I'm just going to read it because my brain is mush and I couldn't remember it off the top of my head. So this is exactly what I said. See, it's me.
I can't read that shit. Just read it out loud.
Read the damn thing, dude.
It said, so I said, I like to think that story sets the stage and the objectives, and that the players make it their own through their actions. Often, though, multiple themes can be masked over the same objectives, like we mentioned down pilot a couple of times, capture the flag, things like that, can be masked over the same objectives, but putting a twist on it makes it its own unique experience. Like at Ground Zero, I think it was Hunt for Red October, we had to find a laptop. But in order to find the laptop, we had to find an entrenching tool and a metal detector.
Yeah, and that doesn't work unless you have some kind of story, scenario, reason for it. Like, why the hell am I digging up a laptop unless it's like, hey, this was buried as a dead drop?
Yeah. And I was going to say, I took a unique perspective to that concept because I do mostly game design, and the scenarios, I don't know, I go out and I do them, but for what I find when I'm designing games, a lot of the time, the more complex the objective you want to have, the more story you have to have behind it. Otherwise, people just fall off and get bored. It's kind of like they're related to each other, and you have to keep that in mind, because simple objectives, you can throw a light storyline to it. But if you start being like, hey, I want you to dig with that metal detector, there needs to be a lot more to it. Otherwise, people are like, this is dumb and I'm not going to do it. And then the event falls apart because the people lose interest over the situation.
There's a comment in the chat real quick I want to read out. It's Marcelino Thelwell. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He says, to me, a fun objective is one that has a strongly story-driven purpose. So I think he's agreeing with you, Joe. I don't want to stand by flags to capture a point. I want to be locating folders containing intel, a laptop with plans, etc. So Marcelino is agreeing that, a little bit more immersion for the scenario-driven games is going to help make it more fun.
Well, that's a really cool concept. That's a great point, a good concept, buddy. And that's a great thing. Instead of having, if you're building a game, if you're a field owner or you're running a game at a field or something like that, change it up a little bit. Don't just use flags. Use Steve the limiting capture the flag dummy. Use things that I changed his name in the group chat, by the way, to that. It's already done. Instead of have a folder, have a physical object that's just a little bit different every time. Just it mixes up the flavor a little bit. That's a great point. If it's capture the flag every single time, it's a physical flag. It and that's really what Tom does at Masato Games. Is he Crossfire? It is capture the flag, but there's a twist to it. It's not going to be as easy as that.
It's basically capture the flag, but the flag is like a 100-pound rocket assembly.
Right. It's going to get broken halfway across the field. It changes up a little bit to it. The other thing is, and again, building upon this, if you're being told, hey, you have to find these 2 objectives so that you complete that objective, and then you're told, hey, whoever completes more objectives overall in the over-encompassing part of the day wins the overall game. That means that the other team could continuously kill your whole team the whole day, but if that's all they're doing and they're not getting any objectives, are they really winning that scenario, that game? And going, hey, okay, hey, they got the laptop, but they didn't get this. Now that refocuses the entire game on going after those objectives specifically and can kind of change the flow a little bit.
And I was going to say, that actually also goes into like how you can weight certain objectives. Because with Airsoft, there's always going to be weird things about balancing games. You're always going to have certain objectives that are easier for one team than another, but you can come up with scenario reasons for why this objective is less important. Like, hey, this HVT is your main target, but if you could also get this drug stash, and maybe the drug stash is a little bit easier, so you don't weigh that as much because the HVT is what you really want them focusing on. So scenarios kind of give you an excuse to weight certain things in favor of one team or another based on how hard it is for them.
Well, and on top of that, you also have the capability, too, to have multiple objectives that each of the teams could be completing either simultaneous or continuously across the day. One objective leads into the other. And we see that. I know we point to Ground Zero Airsoft a lot, but Tom does a really great job with those ops.
Tom is genuinely, I think, one of the most talented game designers in our region. I will say that without reservation.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool too, because when you do things the way we're talking about too, it lets you have some sort of if you want continuality between your games. It lets you run the same teams every single time, which kind of creates something cool, because if you have, the this group and the this group, let's Bad Blood, right? The Marxist and everything else.
American Milsim is another example. People get very invested in the factions there.
Right. Yeah. When you have, even if the factions are the only thing that really carries over between your games, right? You set the scenario. All it is you're basically wearing tan or green or whatever it is. But if the factions, like, for example, the black shirts, take on a personality of themselves, and you have that, regardless if you run the same game at the same location or if you switch up the location with those games, people go, oh, that team's coming here for this big game I'm going to. I got to get this helmet. I want to get this. I got to buy some patches from Gun Gamers to slap on my shoulder. Things like that you'll do. And suddenly it starts taking on a longer term lifespan of an organism, basically, which is neat.
Which is something that's interesting, too, because you mentioned the black shirts thing. Like, Judy is not part of the official Bad Blood lore.
No, absolutely not.
It is not condoned. We get cropped out of pictures. It's a thing that's there, but
that's the thing. So that brings up an interesting point. So how much scenario design and story design do you set up? And then how relevant is that if something else takes on a life of its own? Because with Bad Blood, that's one example, but we've seen a lot of examples, I think, over the years of how it grew, like the official lore of an event series kind of eventually gives way to just the player banter and the player involvement and the players driving the lore. So to the point where the scenario is almost irrelevant. Like, when's the last time we went to a Milsim West game and everyone really knew like the name of the location we were fighting for? Like, it becomes a whole different thing where you just focus on that's NATO or Hato, and we're the militia, and we know this group that we're playing with, and we know the guys on the other team, and it's all we want to fuck with those guys. So it's like a personal story, like Garrett said.
And I think it's and Kyle can probably weigh in on this as well. When we're talking about these scenario-driven games as well, when it's not just backyard brawling, or let's call it scenario games, somewhere being in between the crazy long 40-hour games they're supposed to have year after year stories and backyard stuff, somewhere in the middle of those, where a field might take on a continuous scenario because of the location, because you have the oil refinery, you have the downed helicopter, you have the tower, you have these locations that are known, and you can build up lore and stuff about them. A flag that might have been flown there for 3 years running now suddenly goes missing. You know, you can have a thing that might be scenario, like, hey, a traveling game, like you guys know a lot of these games better than I do, but the traveling games that move around from spot to spot, or games that are done at like GZA every year or RCA or anything like that, that will create two different scenarios where you have a scenario that moves around or a scenario that's kind of unique to that location.
Yeah, I think kind of dividing that up just to provide some people examples. Ground Zero Airsoft hosts Black Hawk Down every year. They host a Black Hawk Down themed game every single year, and they do stuff a little bit different. I know when we went 2 years ago to it, the scenario was different than what we saw this year.
Yeah,
we went, which is nice because you still have that overarching theme. And I think kind of the nice thing about the Black Hawk Down event is most people that go to that kind of know the story already. They just like to experience it in a different way.
That's something I think is interesting with theming airsoft games. Themes that people are kind of already familiar with, themes that don't get too obscure, themes that are very almost cliche, are the themes that people really like. The less unique you get to a certain extent, the more mass appeal you have, because people aren't looking for an ultra unique story. They're looking to play something that they're kind of is like a fantasy that's very common.
Yeah, well, it helps when you're developing a scenario and you have that core fantasy that everybody is kind of knows, that theme that they're all familiar with, and then you use that, and especially over a chain of events where things happen and things becomes obsessed over, like a flag or a point or Judy, and what happens is you take that and you run with it and you use it and you apply it to the future, and then it gains even more popularity where you still have that core there, but you use those factors to expand the game and make it even better, and willing to adapt to say, hey, this core scenario, not really super relevant, but I can take what was made relevant from that game and apply it to future games.
And that's a huge thing for keeping people invested. That's the biggest thing you can do for keeping people invested and coming back to the games. If you go to a game 2 years in a row and it's the same game 2 years in a row, subconsciously you may be like, yeah, okay, and then something new comes out, that's going to catch your attention a lot quicker. But if you have a game that you already are sort of familiar with and you already have this running thing for, and you're like, oh, they're doing this year, like you're a game designer and running the game, you start dropping hints as the months goes on, you do a big reveal, oh, we're doing this year. Now people are going to want to get in on it. When you do something like a Black Hawk Down game, and Eric was just saying something that's not necessarily very unique, you wind up also getting a positive familiarity. People might do things from the movie, or if they read the book, that will be a funny thing. Kyle will remember this from the infamous Black Hawk Down game of 2007, I want to say, that summer. This is back a number of years ago with Western New York Airsoft League. There was one of our guys who, this was on Executive Outcomes long before Gun Gamers or any of this was a thing. This is the old EO team with the Rochester guys. I think it was Helmet. We shoved a live smoke. Gun Gamers does not condone this action. We shoved a live smoke grenade in his backpack, and he went running through the camp like when what's his name's backpack got hit, and it sparked the ammo, and there was sparks shooting out of his backpack.
Yeah.
And everybody got that reference. everybody got that reference. If he had done that during the game, people would have stopped to laugh. He did it,
and if he had done that at any other game, no one would have fucking understood it.
Right. So if you're doing a Black Hawk Down game or Wolverines.
Red Dawn.
Red Dawn. Thank you. If you're doing a Red Dawn game, or if you're doing a zombie game or something like that, but it has basis in Resident Evil or Dawn of the Dead or something like that, like They're Coming to Get You, Barbara. If you have people that are yelling memes basically out of movies or books or common media,
so
everybody knows what's going on.
So I was going to say, so what you're talking about is then the scenario design facilitating the social element of the game to a certain extent.
Do you want to bring this up?
Oh yeah,
this is now the time to bring it up. You brought up the social aspect.
This actually, I think, is a convergence of the scenario design facilitating story elements that help people get invested in the game, facilitating objective play that gets people continuously invested in the game, and facilitating a social element of people interacting. And it was actually fucking brilliant the way it was played. And I don't know if it would have worked with any other group of players quite the way it did.
The particular player base that day at Ground Zero Airsoft, it culminated and coagulated into something unique. I don't think you could have pulled that off in upstate New York. I don't think you could have pulled that off in Pennsylvania. I think it happened in Connecticut, and it'd be interesting to see if it could happen anywhere else. Eric, why don't you, since we all have different mini stories that happened, why don't you set up the whole thing, and then we'll do like Garrett, Kyle, and myself, because about 5 different things all happened at once during this.
And I want to make sure that, like, as we're telling the story too, like we kind of explain ourselves of why are we telling the story in relation to this this kind of topic. But basically, the way the game was designed for this Black Hawk Down game was because Tom wanted to give a bit of the experience of having rules of engagement, which is a realistic element that helps with immersion and helps with role play, which gets people more invested in the game. Tom wanted to have that. So Tom decided that the US team was not allowed to shoot at the Somali team until the Somali team either shot at them or until the Somali team started moving the drug stashes. So that was
one of our objectives, was to move fake drug stashes with it was like chop down bamboo trees or something.
It was not chopped down, it was like 15-foot long bundles of like 30 pounds that you had to drag through the dirt, and these were not easily movable objectives. Essentially,
no, this was a pain in the ass. But so that was the deal, and we also had other objectives to accomplish. In the meantime, we had to secure like 20 gallons of water.
Yep.
And we had to move some chicken feed to a storage house.
Yep.
So those objectives we could very easily accomplish peacefully, which was a very interesting way for him to say, hey, Somali team, you have incentive not to shoot the US team immediately, because these objectives will be super easy for you if everyone's friendly.
They could not physically bar us from moving the water or the feed. They did a couple of times, but ultimately it was, well, are you going to do something about it? Well, no. Okay, cool. Then step aside. We'd like to roll this barrel through. They couldn't actually do anything.
Because if they shot at us, and this was where the game rules helped enforce the scenario, if they shot at us, then they would be required to all go back to respawn and all restart at respawn. Every single one.
Except for 2 guys who, and I give these guys so much prop, one of them had a perfect, exact, pretty much a 1-to-1, like 95%, Ranger reenactment. And the other guy had a Delta reenactment with radio gear and a headset from the 90s that I had never even seen before. These 2 guys nailed it.
I think he had a Bowman headset.
It was an old Bowman headset.
Yeah, it was an old
school.
I think the best part is in the parking lot, he came up to us when we were trying to rally up with the group, and he goes, "Gordy's gone, man. Take I'll be outside.
Yeah,
Like,
he was
quoted
quoting
the
he was
movie, and it
quoting
was
the movie.
great.
But the thing is Tom was just smart of Tom. Those two guys, because they nailed it and everybody was giving them major admiration, he let them stay deep in the woods while everybody else had to go back to respawn when that happened, which meant that we all knew, oh crap, there's two Delta guys out there somewhere, and they were pretty hardcore players, so that was like element. There was an element in the back of our heads the whole time where, okay, even if this happens one way or the other, there's two guys out there that could literally be anywhere. So
just real quick, you betcha, there will be time to ask questions. We will do questions at the end. Cool. But anyway, so continuing on though, so that was kind of the setup. So as a result, we didn't want to piss off the US team immediately. We had every single member of the Somali team, all like, how many of us were there? There was probably almost 100 of us.
Almost 100, easy. Yeah.
And we had everyone take the mags out of their guns, clear their guns, and not shoot anything. And we just went and did all the peaceful objectives and just would banter with the US team. And it was fucking hilarious.
And I would like to add that Tom had no faith. He's like, yeah, this is going to last like 30 seconds. We're like, no, we're fucking into it. We're going to do this.
We had a time, to clarify for people, we had about a 30-minute time limit before, or it was an hour or something like that, where we had to get all three objectives to the safe house. So under this, eventually we were going to have to move those drugs. The US team knew it and the Somali team knew it, that no matter how long we try to keep the peace going for, eventually we had to move the drugs.
But that also gave us an opportunity. And this is why I love how this was designed. This is why I'm using it as an example of story design being used to make a clever game design, because all of these things just coalesce to give us so many ways to play. It gave us a lot of role play opportunity, which opened up a lot of options for strategy, because then we could goad the US team into firing unprovoked, and then they all had to restart, and we could seize that opportunity to move drugs. And why don't you talk about that, Garrett?
Okay, so after we had moved our peaceful objectives, you know, the US and the Somali teams are very intermingled in this village area. And all of a sudden, you hear some shots go off in the distance. And I was standing out in the open in the middle of the town. I guess you could call it the square by one of the entrances or whatever. All of a sudden, the U.S. guys all kind of pushed back, and one of them pulled their pistols out and pointed it at me. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? I haven't shot at you yet. Because all of a sudden, you hear firing going on in the distance. You hear a couple people say hit, hit, hit. Yep. And he made the mistake of pulling the trigger twice, and he shot me square in the chest. What he didn't realize is that the U.S. team had accidentally friendly fired each other.
So they were so gung-ho. They were so gung-ho.
Yes, and they were on edge.
I had radio with Tom, and I hear people yelling at me, Garrett's been shot. Garrett's been shot. U.S. shot first. And I just went, Tom, we have a Somali team is reporting a casualty. The U.S. fired upon us. And you hear Tom over the loudspeaker.
And Tom is walking by as he's doing this. He's looking at me, and I'm laying on the ground dead, because after Garrett got shot and all this shit, I got shot because the U.S. team just panicked and started shooting Somalis. So,
whoops.
Yeah. So ended up all having to go back to respawn, and we were able to move all of the drugs.
Yeah,
while they were back at respawn.
We used that as the perfect opportunity. Right. They all had to go back to respawn before they could come back into the game. And so while they were headed back, like Joe was about to say, their respawn was at the opposite corner of where the objective was. So we used that opportunity. Sorry, I stole your thunder.
That's good.
We used that opportunity to take our, I guess you could call it an aggressive objective, to move it, get it into position, and then we could hunker down while the U.S. team came after us. So we now had the advantage of a defensible position that we could hold.
And if it could have gone easily, and that's the beauty of this whole thing, is it could have gone the other way.
Absolutely.
It could have been one of us jumped the gun, and now the U.S. has surrounded us, can open fire on us, and the U.S. was very coalesced. Us Somali team, we were wandering around our village. people just started wandering around. Nobody was in a squad anymore. I was going up and down around. I didn't know where any of the other guys were. I didn't know where Garrett got shot initially. So if they had waited, this would have gone very differently. We may have started to get more defensive. And of course, as we started getting more defensive, the U.S. team would have started digging in, and it could have turned into an open firefight. It could have also been that we tried to sneak the drugs out, and they caught us, and now we have an open firefight. It could have gone a lot of different ways, which is why it's cool.
And that's what I think is so clever about something like that, is that it was a very strategically flexible type of situation as a result of, hey, I have this one element of the story, just that one little element of giving the U.S. team rules of engagement. One tiny little element of the story that then opens up so many opportunities for how the game can be played. That is a story design decision being applied correctly to a game design.
You know what's also a good example too?
Which part?
Administrative leave for the cop team during the Cops and Robbers game.
Yes, that was something I did, which was great.
That was great.
So this is something else I'm going to talk about because so I ran a game that was Cops and Robbers, basically. It was called Honor Among Thieves. And that game was based on a bank robbery. And I had hostages in the bank. And I wanted to give the cop team a real motivation to get those hostages out safely because that was their objective. So on top of the story reason of these are hostages and your cops, then to reinforce the story and to reinforce their need to get those objectives, I gave them a real gameplay consequence of, hey, if you shoot a hostage, a bunch of your team gets pool noodles and you don't have guns anymore for the next 20 minutes.
And the cop team ended up shooting all three of the hostages.
Yeah, I was the first one to go.
Of those
So
pool
proud of that
noodles
one.
got handed out.
No, I think the best part about that was because I was in charge of the bank robber team for the first scenario. I decided, in order to control the hostages, to prevent them from trying to escape or to basically get the most control out of them, is I zip tied their hands in front of them, and then I gave them a live hand grenade.
And pulled the pin on it.
Pulled the pin on it and said, I want you to hold this for me.
Yeah.
And so when the cop shot them, when you go limp after somebody actually shoots you, you drop the hand grenade. You basically wiped out the bank 3 times from everybody that was in it.
Which I want to point out from a player perspective here, because we talked a lot about administrative and game design things here. From a player perspective, that is such an embracing of the scenario to play the game in a unique way. So if you actually think about the way a scenario is designed and you think about the flexible options you have within the limits of a scenario and a story design, you can come up with new and more interesting ways to play the game.
So last year at I don't know if you guys remember this or not, but last year at the Black Hawk Down game, we had to move the down pilot, which in that case was the 55 kilogram dummy.
Oh yeah, that was 2 years ago.
It was 2 years ago. Jeez, wow,
Yeah.
man, time flies when you're playing Airsoft. Well, the dummy, similar to what happened with Garrett and what Eric was just saying, the dummy got put in the jail cell, which is literally a jail in the middle of the main village of Ground Zero Airsoft, and it had just gotten shoved in the corner, and like had a chain wrapped around it that they had a fake thing they had to cut through. Although Tom did talking about game elements and making it more real. To interject myself here, this year at Ground Zero, Tom had a real chain with a single plastic, thick plastic ring that you actually had to cut through. So they were cutting through a chain. So they had two guys holding the chain to keep it taut, one guy cutting it, some guy covering him. It was just a little bit more believable to see guys doing that. And now it's actually a real objective to try and get through. That's going, oh, they actually chained this shut, And
that was to simulate the pilot being trapped inside the helicopter, and you had to free him by removing pieces of the helicopter.
Again, adding scenario to an objective to make it more believable and more fun. But last year,
more unique.
and more unique. I'd never seen it before. I think it's a great idea. It's a plastic thing. If you need to take it off in a hurry, you can. But it's somebody, you're physically doing something as opposed to just like, I'm doing the thing. I got to be here for 5 seconds before this triggers, or 30 seconds, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But
I need to have a hand on this guy for a minute. You know.
Right. So what they did 2 years ago is that dummy, once they put it in, they took fishing wire that one of the guys carried on them and rigged a Thunderbee under the dummy. So when the U.S. forces finally got into the jail cell and they had to pick up this huge dummy, the guy threw the dummy over his shoulder and pulled the pin and wiped out everybody. And they had to medic everybody and get the thing back up there. But that was a good idea. That was a player looking at a unique scenario with a physical dummy as opposed to a flag and going, I can do something really nasty with this. I'm going to do that. Laying booby traps. You know, you can't really booby trap a lot of things in Airsoft, but there's a couple things you can if it fits within the rules of the game at the field you're at and the scenario you're doing. It makes sense. You know, planning a booby trap is the thing now.
So I think what we're kind of talking about and what we're kind of agreeing on here is that the whole point of a scenario or a story or anything with any Airsoft game is to have a unique, fresh, fun way to play the game and a reason to do so.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it becomes a larger and larger toolbox for you to use as well. For you to pull out those again, maybe put a little twist on it this year, or if you know there was a particularly nasty objective that everybody had fun with, but man, that was a doozy, that's the one you save, and that's the one you save for your really big game. Cool, we got a full crew of 200 people at our field today. We're going to pull out that objective, and now everybody kind of knows, oh great, this is happening as soon as they start talking about an object that you need, or hey, here's this thing going on, and now it triggers a response in the team and changes that whole dynamic just by saying you're doing this objective today. You know?
But would it be also fair to say that it's important that you never sacrifice the integrity of the game and that you keep the rules consistent while you're designing your scenario and your role play type elements? Because I think the simpler you go with the rules, the more freedom people have, but you want to keep the rules, you know, integrity intact.
Yeah, I think there's a balancing act between the game aspect of Airsoft and the lore aspect of it.
And the LARP aspect. Yeah. Because we've all been to games where they tried too hard to give too much freedom with the LARP to the point where it felt like there were no rules.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of when you're making an objective, always look at it, and Kyle, when you're doing your field too, where you place an objective. Every time you place an objective up that damn ravine, I hate you a little bit more. It's just it is what it is. When you're working with the field, also, if you're going to place an objective 30 feet up a tree, understand that some people are not going to be able to get to it, and you might limit them a little bit. If you're going to place an objective in the corner of the field next to a respawn, understand you're going to make the other team, one team's going to have a hard time. Always look at it from two perspectives. But like kind of what happened at the end of the Black Hawk Down game this year, the Somali team had been kicking a lot of butt, an awful lot of butt. And even though the U.S. team had 2 Humvees with HPA-powered classic Army miniguns, thanks, Tom, you know, the Somali team had some heavy guns against them, but we just worked well together. At the end of that, Tom, I don't know if this is his original objective or if he changed this halfway through, but he realized that one team was doing significantly better than the other. So he shifted the objective. He made an objective that was very much on the U.S. side's
Well, he put the
favor.
U.S. on the defense.
Right. And gave them an opportunity to succeed and make us now have to fight for it and change the dynamic. And so if you have to do that in the middle of the game, make sure that you haven't created objectives that aren't flexible.
Marcelino is on a fucking roll here with the comments. He just made another good one. Scalability is also important with design. What is fun for 200 players and 20 players can be very different just based on the player base and numbers, which is very true. And that's something that you have to keep in mind, like from the get-go of game design is, and we mentioned this in a previous video, Kyle. When you're designing a game, the first thing you need to know is roughly how many people you're designing for.
Exactly, because what the number of people you design for totally changes how you're going to run the event. Like a lot of the things that we had a great time at GZA with would not work on a small scale. It doesn't work.
There's no fucking way the Black Hawk Down game this year would have worked with 50 people.
No, absolutely not.
Actually, we were surprised at the turnout of the bank robber game. Like I think we were expecting 40 people, something like that. I think 60 or 70 people ended up showing up.
Yeah. And that game barely worked with that many people.
Yeah.
Correct, yes.
And a game this weekend, I designed thinking I was going to get like maybe 40 some people, and then 64 showed up, and suddenly the game was way more difficult as a result because the field was more congested.
Yep.
So it's always tough, man. On
the game design stuff, that's why what I like to do is you got to have a ton of fragos that you can throw on the fly. When something doesn't work, you can adjust, especially if you can keep it in the lore, then people get really excited about that.
And Kyle, what's a frago for those who don't know?
Fragos are like, I don't know the technical acronym off the top of my head now that you put me on the spot, but basically what happens is when shit goes sideways and there you go, and you throw another objective on there that wasn't in the original plan to keep people moving and things like that, basically. So.
And that's something, though, is if you have a clever and good scenario and story type of design that works well with your game design, then that should actually be a good inspiration for where you can draw fragos from. Because Kyle and I, we've run games where we have had to pull shit out of our ass, but knowing what the theme of the day was, it was easy for us to pull shit out of our ass because we had plenty of imagination to work with of, well, this is what the theme of the game is. What are people going to want to do within that theme? And we had an easy time doing that as a result.
Exactly. Yeah.
It is. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's always important to have that list of items and to read the scenario, because if you read the scenario, you can pull shit out of your ass and people will love it. However, if you just have a strict book that you stick to and you pull something ass, people are going to go, why the fuck am I doing this?
That's really the whole goal of the scenario thing, is that not have somebody who's maybe having a rough day, or when they've been playing the whole day and it's getting near the end to look at themselves and go, why the hell am I doing this? Because then people then slow down or want to leave or just go, I'm going to go do my own thing.
And then you have the opposite effect too, is that if one team's having a really tough time struggling, the other team might think that they're just having it too easy and they're going to get bored and they're just going to be like, well, this was just a cakewalk. I'm not really interested in doing this anymore, or I don't need to continue doing on. I could goof around, whatever. All of a sudden you throw them a frag order and you're like, oh crap, I got to go do this thing to prevent the other team from doing it, or they may have a different end of it. There's different ways to play it out.
If you're designing these games, remember, you're a DM in a D&D campaign with absolutely no control. That is the reality.
Yeah. The players will always fuck with you.
But it's and that is an important note. I know we're getting low on time here, but that is also an important note for all of our listeners, for people that are listening to this and kind of, if you're agreeing with us on this, remember from a player's perspective too, that if players go onto the field not caring what the scenario is, and if players go out on the field for larger style games, or if there is a theme or scenarios and that kind of thing, and don't just go out there going, I'm going to shoot things today, that's fine. But if everybody does that and the whole day falls apart, it is something that you have to, as a game designer and as players, understand. If nobody wants to kind of play ball in that situation, you may very have a scenario just kind of fall apart into a giant skirmish, which, again, not the worst thing in the world sometimes, but if you're heavily invested in what you're doing, and especially if you're running this game and that happens, don't get discouraged, because we had a great time at Ground Zero Airsoft. Like Eric said at the beginning of the story that we told, that might not have worked in other fields or in other player bases. It just might not have.
And you gotta be real careful too, because if you go to a $25 or $30 all day skirmish where you go out, you play for an hour, and then you come back and sit down for like 15 minutes or whatever, or you go out and play for 15 and come back for 5 or whatever, you're not going to get a whole lot of depth. Like, you're going to get zero depth at that point. But when you start going to games where you're paying somebody $100, $150, sometimes even $200, like when you're paying $200 to go to Milsim West, they lay out the entire battle plan in front of you. There's sand tables, there's PowerPoints, there's
at that point, the
stuff.
scenario design is the game design to a certain extent. Like, the plan of action is the story, and you are trying to make that story happen.
Right. If an objective gets taken, if your objective was to take the train yard and you get there and there's Russians already at the train yard, then your objective is not whatever was past that. It's kill everybody at that train yard until they're all dead and you own it. And if that takes the majority of your day to do, that's what you're doing. And that you might very well get bogged down on one objective. But as long as it's an active firefight and things are happening and flanks are happening and you have communication, it's still fun. Even if you didn't accomplish a damn other thing on that list, if you knew that you were doing that goal at the time, that's a rewarding experience in Milsim.
And that's a pretty simple type of scenario design that still feeds into exactly what people expect out of it, which I think is also critical. When you're designing a game, know what people expect out of your games and know what people are looking for. Because you're obviously, when you're making a game, you're not Robert Ford, all right? You don't get to just tell your stories and have the Delos board bend to your will. You are trying to appease people who are buying tickets to come to your games. So sometimes you do have to just give them the shallow guns and tits that Robert Ford hates so much. Little Westworld reference for you nerds.
For the record, Milsim West objectives for the gun gamers, by the way, is borderline hypothermia and that shower afterwards. That's really all we're going to do, is to just hate ourselves and then shower and have a soda. Those are like the two things if having a sugary drink after a Milsim West game when you've been doing nothing but chugging water and eating MREs it's like your first episode all over again. It's amazing.
So then I want to talk just a little bit because I want to just finish up our main topic and then open the floor to questions and comments. But what about LARP games? Because this is where you get interesting, because LARP type games require so much scenario design. But at the same time, yeah, Kyle, go ahead.
I was going to say, LARP type games are the most dangerous type of games in terms of what could go wrong. Because I have a lot of bad history with shitty LARP type games that I have gone to over the years.
Yeah.
As Joe knows really, really well. And if you don't do a heavy LARP game with amazing control on the event and the people running it don't understand how to control it and put limits on the people and how they're doing shit, you will have nothing but problems. And it is very tricky.
I'm gonna convert this from Airsoft to video game. I want to see if you guys agree on this one. Your standard skirmish, your backyard brawl, is a Counter-Strike match. It is two people start on two separate sides and they smash each other's faces until somebody wins. When you take a step up and you do a event like the bank robber game, or if you do a couple of other games you've done RCA or like smaller side games and that kind of thing. Even some of the AT games back in the day when we had like a cops and robber game for that is branching up to maybe a little bit more of like insurgency, or maybe like a light Arma game where you have like there's some stuff going on, but you've got more flexibility where you can move around. When you hit Milsim West, now you're getting
full Arma.
Your full armor. That's there is literally you're on Discord or chat and like there's communication and a lot of things can go wrong where people are it turns into a walking simulator if you're not careful. When you hit LARP, you are literally playing Gary's Mod or Minecraft, or you are dropping players in a sandbox and you are giving them a loose thing and you're letting the players kind of direct what is going on, which is why LARP is the most dangerous, because all of us are people, our listeners and everybody's sitting at this table right now are people. We're prone to do people things, good and bad. So you're creating a sandbox scenario where it could go awesomely and you get cool interactions like me playing a Somalian and bumming a smoke off of one of the NATO soldiers and being like, boy, you have no lighter, and like making fun of him for not having a lighter until somebody gives me a lighter. Or you can get scenarios where like people get too heavily invested in what they're trying to accomplish and then fights break out.
Well, and like Joe was mentioning, when you start getting to the LARP heavy stuff, and actually Kyle mentioned this too, is you got to be really careful. You kind of have to guide people. It's like herding cats. You have to guide people in the direction you kind of want them to go. And then you don't necessarily just open the floodgates and let them do whatever. You just kind of open the funnel a little bit wider and give them some more options and slowly allow them to kind of flesh the scenario out.
Yes.
But the important thing is that you're headed in the direction that you can control and that you have a desired outcome kind of in mind.
I think what we're saying here in a roundabout way is you don't let the rule set take the hit in favor of just telling people to have story reasons not to be assholes. Like there need to be rule set controls that are actual gameplay consequences rather than, oh, well, you can just be whatever you want because you're making a story, but someone making a story or some people making a story might just derail the whole game.
Call your hits. That steel K-pot you got off eBay doesn't work in BB Wars.
So I think then what we come to as a conclusion is what we've been saying this whole time, but I guess we've just used a lot of examples to reinforce it, is whatever type of game you're running, whatever type of event you're doing, whatever type of objectives you're looking for, the scenario should always serve the gameplay. The gameplay should also help feed into having people be invested in the scenario, but balanced, good gameplay should always be the priority.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Cool. Anyone else have anything else they want to add?
Open it to questions, I think.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm gonna read off some comments. Some people had been asking some questions as we were doing. Here we go. Pavlakos, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. He had a couple of comments as we were going that I wanted to save until the end because they're good comments. He said, first of all, he asked a question, but I'm gonna save that question. He said a good idea for game design, and this is kind of in general because I can't really find all of his comments, is try event missions as pickup games the weekend before the event, which I think is a good suggestion.
That is fantastic.
Yes, that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, if you're looking to run games and you're looking to do multiple fragos and multiple missions as part of your scenario, if you can at smaller games, absolutely run those fragos as their own thing, as shorter games at your local field or at a different field even. That's a good idea, Pavlos. That's a really good suggestion. Then he asked the question, what do you think of CCW at Milsim and Airsoft games? And I'm assuming he means like concealed carry of airsoft guns, because concealed carry are real guns. You could probably guess our opinions on people having concealed carry in general, but a concealed carry at an airsoft field is usually against the rules, so we do not advocate that.
Really? I didn't realize that.
There are
not real guns. We're talking about concealed carrying airsoft guns, right? We're all on the same page.
Talking about concealed carrying airsoft guns. If it's part of your loadout and you think that there's a good reason to have it, I mean, sure. Or if it's a LARP game and you have a reason to hide out a handgun, then yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Joe. Yeah. The bank robber scenario, we had 3 NPCs that worked at the bank. Yep. 2 of them carried concealed, and I had to have my bank robbers check people.
Yep,
and brilliant. I think that's fantastic.
And
I didn't even realize that was a thing.
They actually stole guns from other people and used it as an attempt to escape.
Yep.
Fantastic. Yep. I think that's great. I think that if you can work that in, I'm interested to see if CCW will work outside of a scenario game. I don't think it would. No. I think it would just, if you're playing a game, just pull your pistol. People are going to shoot you no matter what as soon as they see you're on the other team.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense outside of a scenario game, but at a scenario game, it could absolutely be a lot of fun. Another good question was, so who's going to Eminent Dawn next week was asked by Tim L. And the answer is myself, Kyle, Corey, Matt Lutz, who is actually in the comments on this stream, or was, I don't know if he still is, and Becca. We are all going to Eminent Dawn, and we were trying to convince Garrett, but I don't know if he's going to make it.
Yeah, I got to double check and see. I'm getting weird emails about this World War II thing that I'm doing. Like, I'm seeing it was apparently canceled. Now it might not be. I don't know.
Tanks.
Yeah, I get to ride in a tank.
I can't go because I have family obligations.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see.
Another good question. This one is a pretty obvious answer, I think. Which platform needs the most maintenance? Rank most to least. HPA, GBB, AEG, and I'm assuming BAR stands for bolt action rifle. Yeah. Joe is salty. Yeah. The
He's getting something. He's
doing something.
It's show and tell.
While Joe is gone, I think we can all agree the most maintenance by far is gas blowback. By far the most maintenance.
Absolutely
You see this?
the most maintenance.
This doesn't work. This has not worked for months. Here, no, keep talking, please. Just keep talking. It's okay. I'm just gonna, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, no. Gas blowback guns by far need the most maintenance.
Absolutely.
You usually need to clean those like totally before and after every game. Parts wear out on those pretty consistently, and you need to replace those. I mean, most people I know replace at least one thing in their gas blowback rifle.
The whole rifle every year.
Yeah. I probably go through. Ooh, if I had to throw out a number, I probably go through $50 to $75 worth of parts per gun.
I scared the shit out of my cats breaking apart the Mark 18. They're like, oh god.
Okay, then next most maintenance.
preventative
HPA
maintenance
and
or active
GBB
maintenance?
are interesting. HPA is very simple, so I would say HPA requires the least maintenance for like the number of round counts you can go through before you need to mess with it.
HPA has a very, very low maintenance schedule. Like I've only I think just now heard of people. They're like, oh, I got to take my engine apart in order to clean something out. That something might be jammed or whatever. I'm like, that even happens with HPA?
If you're talking about major maintenance, major maintenance probably goes gas blowback, AEG, and then HPA. But preventative maintenance, you're going to be doing more preventative maintenance on your AEGs before you do it on your HPAs. Your AEGs are going to be, I got to reshim something, or I got to replace this or there. Gas guns.
The barrel is on all of them.
Gas guns are at the top for both. You're constantly lubricating them. You're replacing parts. When something breaks, it's a full maintenance breakdown and a replacement part. But HPA and I think AEG flip between preventative and actual fixes.
Yeah. Then bolt action rifle, that depends so much on what bolt action rifle you have.
I'm assuming that's Springer. I'm assuming he's talking about
assuming he means Springer, because if he means HPA bolt action rifle, then it's just as much maintenance as any other HPA platform.
If that's the case, then Springer's always at the bottom, because I had a Spring L96 that I sold to Tig, one of the guys in the group who has been around for a while. We took engine grease, like engine that's used on engine blocks that can take up to like 15,000 degrees or something stupid. And I smeared that on the bolt 7 years ago, and we haven't had to lube it since. So that's your spring maintenance.
But that's just running stock. If you have something that's highly upgraded, there's a lot more maintenance involved.
And then it goes into what gun, because an upgraded, VSR platform, it eats the sears and has other issues, versus like my SRS, it should need very little maintenance as its life goes on besides lubrication.
But then again, you don't shoot bolt action rifles that much. So again, the length of time you can go between maintenance is pretty long. So yeah, those are probably at the bottom.
I would say probably except for the barrel. If you're really
you're cleaning the barrel obsessively. If you're
if you're doing a bolt action rifle or a sniper rifle, or even a DMR, I would say that you're cleaning the barrel constantly.
Yeah, but that's barely a preventative maintenance thing. Let's call basic cleaning not even a thing. You should be cleaning your barrel every once in a while. You should be, even on an AG or an HPA or a GBB, you're going to get dust and dirt and crap in it.
To be fair, we did have someone in our group who had a GBBR who, how many years without cleaning it?
Steve?
Before it broke? Yeah. Steve, it was like 3 years, I think, before it broke.
Steve.
That's because Steve has a low standard of performance, and he'll just let things like be basically broken and still use them.
I mean, he's like, well, it cycled, and then he finally stopped when it stopped cycling.
and then by that point, at that point, I think like he tried shooting it some other time. He goes, something doesn't quite work right, and I dove into it to fix it, and I'm like, dude, you need a whole new internal set, new bolt carrier, new trigger pack, new hop up inner barrel. Everything needs to be replaced. He goes,
really. What we're getting at is gas guns. Gas guns. Really, it's such an order of magnitude higher than any other type of airsoft gun, even stuff that hasn't come out yet.
This is why I have so many gas guns. I just cycle through all of them.
You have to maintain gas guns a lot like real guns. You have to clean them every single time you take them out, basically.
I would argue you want to
really live. You want to really live in a Milsim West game. One of the blank fire guys. I was I got woken up from a nap. One of the Opie, who is one of the he
Cadre,
is Cadre. He's also actual Marine, like active Marine. where the guy came over to him because it was dark and he was having trouble. He was trying to clear the barrel out of his blank fire because he ate it and he shoved like 4 inches of dirt into the barrel of his real gun. You don't fire a real gun when it has dirt in the end of the barrel. You blow it up. So Opie, in the dark, opened his kit, and I watched him maintenance a real M4 in the dark in the field. That is as Milsim as it gets. That was.
I just want to give a quick shout out to someone with the best name in this chat. There's someone in this chat named Expensive Nylon. That's fucking awesome.
That's great.
Says first time watching one of these streams, looking good. Thank you. I'm glad you're having a good time.
Oh my god. Does he even know? Does he even know? We haven't even revealed the new thing yet. We shouldn't on this stream, but he's predicting something.
Yeah. Okay, got a question specifically for me. Pavlos Pavlakos asks, E-House, how is the Troy VTAC rail on your Crytek? I'm thinking of picking one up, but can't find any reviews. It's very solidly built. It's not the most lightweight rail system, but I like the look of it. I find it ergonomic. It's very flexible, and I got a good price on it. So I think it's really cool. If you like the look of it and you're okay with it not being the lightest rail system on the market, then yeah, give it a look. I don't think there's any real downside to it. It's very solid and it works very well. I like it.
You're not allowed to complain about weight. You run an AR like it's an SMG in your giant meat hands.
I'm just
You're not allowed to complain about weight.
listen, I'm just letting him know in case he cares, okay? Because I don't care.
Looks like an MP5 in your hands, you giant.
Yeah, I know. It really does, but
Okay, Eric will take a PKM and make it look like a standard assault rifle.
Which is funny because the PKM is one Joe, by the way. We did the comparison with Kyle's PKM at the time. It's one me. Eric could theoretically just like sling me on his back and I could blaster master things if I needed to. Jesus.
You Betcha has a question. Okay, so my super technical Crytek question is in regard to the selector plate sling. It sits in between the selector plate and the thing that makes the semi-auto work, but the problem is I don't have it. What you're talking about is the cutoff lever spring, actually.
Hey, we had a thing with a cutoff lever spring.
Yeah, we did. So yeah, what you're looking, what's happening is you don't have a spring from your selector plate to your cutoff lever. So yeah, your semi-auto isn't going to work correctly without that. Getting a new cutoff lever spring, we actually used a spring from a hop-up unit, one of those springs that applies tension rearward to the hop-up unit to press it against the gearbox. We used one of those as a replacement cutoff lever spring. So if you have an extra one of those laying around, try that. As for other springs that might work, like a very small pen spring, like the spring that keeps the clicky part poking out, actually. If you have one of those, that might also be a good replacement. Other than that, you might want to check some spot like Brill Armory or Clandestine Airsoft to get that kind of specialty replacement part.
Or just rock it full auto constantly and buy a nice pistol.
Wouldn't I mean, you could always just buy an extra cutoff lever. Would that not come with a spring?
I don't know if cutoff levers usually come with a spring. I guess it would depend.
One, truthfully.
Yeah, I mean, but search for cutoff lever spring or selector plate sling. Try searching for those on some of those websites. What are your thoughts with regards to the Virgo system or brushless motors in general? Asked by Shinkiro. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know. I don't know as much, technically speaking, about brushless motors. The Virgo system seems cool. I mean, what I've seen about it, it looks cool. But brushless motors,
I mean, brushless motors, they're much more powerful. It's kind of like, in theory, the next stage, like how we went up to lipos and guns got cycling a lot faster with snappier trigger response. Brushless motors is in that same vein of upgrades. But the problem, and my big concern, is I wouldn't switch to one right now because it'll be like the same thing when you first clicked lipos into old gearboxes. Bad things will happen to the rest of the internals. I would wait for the technology to catch up before leaping onto that.
The Virgo system is a complete gearbox.
Yes, yeah. So if you're going to do it, do that. Don't be like, hey, I'm going to take this Sima and shove this brushless motor into it and see what happens.
Yeah.
That motion, too. I don't... Eric, I'm assuming, which company is this from? Is this Virgo
VFC.
itself? Is
Well, VFC
Yeah.
is the one bringing it to market, but apparently it might be like OEM'd by some other company.
it's
I
VFC
remember
for all
someone made a
intents and
comment about it
purpose.
on one of our other videos.
But it's VFC for all intent and purpose. Like if I go to like buy a new VFC gun, I might see one of those gearboxes pop up.
Eventually, not right now, but eventually.
Yeah, they're offering it as a standalone replacement right now.
Okay.
Soul X117. I'm tardy to the party. Can I get a quick rundown of what I missed? We talked about a lot, man. I'm
Start
gonna
over.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave this live as its own video when we're done. But like, we talked about a lot, dude. You might just want to rewatch it.
I disassembled an M4 and chucked it. Things happen, man.
Yeah. You betcha says, do you think if I went to Home Depot and bought one of those random spring packs, I could find one to work? That's very possible. I don't know what sizes springs they have in those spring packs, but if you get a pretty small spring, you could probably find one that works. And you can always like cut it if it's too long or something. So yeah, that might be a good option.
Troll the forums a little bit. I mean, we'll do a little research on this because it's fun. But troll the forums a little bit, see if somebody else ran into that problem, and if they said, "Hey, I got X spring number from Home Depot," it might just save you a little bit of the time.
Yeah. Christopher Yee. Hey, gun gamers. My combat machine with metal RIS is 3 years old now. My upper receiver is plastic, and the plastic threads have stripped, which makes my rails loose and come off. Suggestions: you can buy new combat machine upper receivers and bodies. I believe Airsoft GI carries them. EVIC carries them. So you should be able to buy a new upper receiver, rebuild it, and have new receiver threads.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you screw threads up like that, they're pretty much toast.
Yeah, they're pretty much toast. You need a new upper receiver. You could also theoretically epoxy the thing on, but do you really want... Yeah, that's like permanent. So, you know, it
depends on how much you care about that combat machine. If it's 3 years old and you're like, I'm going to keep using this the way it is, you might just glue it down.
Yeah. Let's see. What's a good CQB weapon? I've been looking at the Crytek SPD or the G&G ARP9. I'm a Crytek fanboy. This is well known. I'm friendly with that company, and I have been using their products for years. So I would pick the Crytek, but a lot of people love the G&G ARP.
Well, I would say...
Sorry.
I was going to say, something to keep in mind is what mags and what are you set up for? Because if you already have an M4 platform and you just get like a PDW, then you're good to go, and all you got to do is buy the gun. Otherwise, you got to buy all the mags for it as well if you get the ARP, if you don't have that platform.
If this is shut up, nerd. If this is CQB exclusive, if you're looking for that style, that's fine. If you want to branch out a little bit, we keep forgetting the TM makes those crazy AA12s. I want to see more of those on the field. You should buy more of those and be on our team because we had one. We had one at GZA, and I watched this younger kid stand up with a drum mag and just lay into it, and it was the funniest thing I've ever seen. Not that you'll be using that at a CQB field, but you never know. It's really cool to see some of these CQB guns come up. Look at the ARP9. Also, take a look at, if you're interested, some of the SRU and chassis that we've been seeing popping up.
Oh, the bullpup chassis.
Not even the bullpup chassis. SRU has the full Glock drop in that you can do a full Glock.
That's a Glock bullpup chassis. It makes the Glock a bullpup.
It's
no,
a PDW.
It does.
No, he has the PDW. No, it's the PDW version. There's two of them now. Anyway,
oh yeah, there is
done.
that.
That's an ARP9 kind of style because you can get long mags out of it. You're almost looking at. Take a look at some of those because they might be also a viable way to go that route.
Aiden Liu just says you guys should come to Revelations at Ballahack. You'd be the best LARP, and you'd be a lot cooler if you did. I want to go to Ballahack really badly. Garrett and I played with one of the guys from Ballahack at Desert Fox events.
A couple of the guys, and they were all bros.
Yeah, and they were awesome guys. And I really want to go to Ballahack. I hear consistently good things about that field. I'd love to go to Revelations. It's just a matter of like getting the time to do it, and the time when I'm not busy. I've been incredibly busy lately. My brother's getting married, all kinds of crazy shit going on. So it's like picking my battles.
That wedding, by the way, we need you back.
Yeah, isn't it Ballahack like 14 hours or so from us?
No, about 8
Virginia.
Hours. Oh, it's Virginia. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, we'll have to plan on it next year.
Yeah, I want to go to Ballahack though. We need.
I do too. I want to check it out.
We'll have to schedule, or at least pick a month where we're like, okay, we're not like doing any big Milsim stuff here. Let's go to Ballahack.
Yeah.
What else do we got? Oh, Ian Leary. Anyway, Ian says when certain equipment in a scenario game becomes overpowered or game breaking, how do you limit it? Example, 16 frag grenades for truck destruction. Normally you would have rules about how much equipment people can carry. Like at most scenario games, there's like we usually do ammo rules or grenade limits or stuff like that. So we will usually have some kind of method where it's like, all right, you can't carry all this shit. But we don't do that at like River City because we
who the hell would buy 16 frag grenades and then throw them
would buy 16 fucking frag grenades.
I know, I'm making fun of him because he's scared.
Yeah.
Well, no, that brings up a point. The Humvees at the Black Hawk Down game, two minigun equipped Humvees on one team. They were limited by it worked for the scenario. They were limited by where they could drive physically by how the field was built up. There were specific rules. The gunner had to completely be outside of the turret behind the gun, so he was exposing his face and shoulders when he or she were firing. Grenades could take out the Humvees. There were Garrett. Just take a deep breath, buddy. Just take a deep breath, buddy. There are you can figure out ways to make larger scale equipment like that work. When we did when we did the Seneca game, the two trucks. There were two trucks. They were built pretty much exactly the same way, same style of attachments for them, and again, they were limited by the field themselves. So every time one of those trucks showed up, both teams, depending on what was available at the time, dealt with it. Some people ran, some people threw grenades, some people fired tagging rounds at it or whatever they had available. A lot of those times you can know right away, hey, is this going to be overpowered? If not, hey, make it so that if you hit it from behind, it's out in one shot, that sort of thing.
And other than that, I don't think we have any pressing questions left. So if you guys have any more questions, just I'll give you guys another like 30 seconds to get those in. And if we don't have any good questions, I think we've basically run the course on this podcast. I think that we had a fun discussion here. Oh, my God. So K-Swag, some people left Pilot Steve for dead, and everyone's just spamming F in the chat now.
Press F for Steve.
By the way, hello, K-Swag. I'm sure you wanted that shout out.
Yeah, Steve's dead, man.
Yeah, everyone's just pressing F to pay respects in the chat. So with that, I guess you're all pressing F to pay respects to the end of this podcast. Matt Lutz, can you bring me beer tomorrow? Matt, I think we can do that. I think I can bring you some beer. But anyway, I've been E-House, and everyone else,
we're just a lollygag of nerds.
Wow. Okay, I'm sober. Nice having a podcast with y'all. Jesus. There's only two of you left. One of you talk.
Yeah, come on.
I'm Kyle.
I'm Garrett.
And we have been Gun Gamers on our first podcast in a while, and our first video in a couple of weeks. We hope you guys all enjoyed it. We hope this was fun for you. We'll see. We're going to try to do these a lot more regularly because we have fun with them. We really love doing these.
And they'll pick up over the winter, too, when we're not out every single weekend going to events.
Winter is drinking season, so we gotta do podcasts.
Whoa! Wait a minute. Every season is drinking season.
Winter is especially drinking season. Winter is heavier drinking season.
This isn't gonna work. We're done. Thank you all for joining us this evening. If you do like these, again, this podcast is still a relatively new thing, so if you do like these and you like them, not necessarily more or less, but if you have ways we can improve these podcasts, leave them in the comments. Let us know.
And just real quick before we leave, because someone asked a question, we will be at River City Airsoft's 5-year anniversary. That is on September 22nd, and that is free play for the whole day. And there are also raffle prizes being given away there. You do not need to be present to win. So if you buy a ticket, even between now and that event, and you win, you can still win if you're not at the anniversary. We will be at Milsim West Presents Spearhead Saratov the last weekend in September. We will be on Militia. we will be at Amped Airsoft's event at Three Rivers Paintball this weekend, Operation Eminent Dawn. I will be commanding the Blue 4 U.S. team. Then I will also be at Desolation, an Omega Productions event, and that is going to be super fun. I'm really excited about that. That's a really survival LARP type game, and I love the format, and I love the guys doing it. Frank and Alex are absolutely excellent people. So, yeah, I'm very excited about all of that, and you guys should be too. So if we see you at any of those events, and if you're of age and you want to hang out after the game or something, I think we could probably manage that. We should really do like a bar meetup
to drink and to have fun and socialize, to clarify that one.
Yeah.
Just kind of let that one just kind of like open-ended.
Yeah, no, we should.
Oh my god, we'd have to take up an entire bar to be able to do something like that.
Well, we already take up an entire bar just with our team. Then with like other teams, that'd be fucking great.
I think we might have to call ahead on that one.
Probably.
All right, people.
With all that business out of the way, thank you guys for watching, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you in the next one. Peace.